Please, sir, let me in. I need your help.
It was the summer of 1986, and I had just graduated from high school. I was living in Vancouver, BC, and a girlfriend and I spent the afternoon at Kitsilano Beach, suntanning. She had to leave early for work, so I stayed on at the beach, alone. It was around 4 o'clock and I was hungry. I walked up the beach over to an area called Spanish Banks. There is a concession stand there. It had a long lineup. It was Expo 86, so we had a ton of tourists that summer. I placed my order but was told it would be a 15 or 20 minute wait for my food. I perched myself on a bench and proceeded to wait. For some reason, I looked across the street. The concession stand is adjacent to the road, a narrow 2-lane road, not the best for beach traffic, and the other side of the road is a forest called the UBC Endowment Lands, attached to the university. There was a guy walking down through the forest, which was also a steep hill. There is no sidewalk below, and it was a really dangerous place to try to cross the street. Not only that, it was an odd place to come out of. Imagine a steep hill with lots of bushes and trees, going straight down to a curb, and then a busy street. The second that I saw this guy, and I was far away at the concession stand, I had that gut-wrenching fear that everyone describes. Even though he was far away, I could tell he was grinning maliciously, and that he was fixated on me. He crossed the street, grinning. At that moment, there were no cars, so he got across easily. He made a beeline straight to where I was, and went and sat on a bench across from me. I am not good at distances, but let's say 10 or 15 feet away. He was First Nations, a little bit older than I was, maybe 19 or 20. He had medium-length hair and was wearing a white t-shirt and a red flannel shirt over it, unbuttoned. He was wearing jeans, I can't remember his shoes, runners of some kind. He was fairly attractive, but utterly evil. Malicious was the word that kept going through my mind. Now his eyes, they were black. No whites could be seen. But they were not shiny like all of the other accounts that I've read. His were dull. The way I described it to my boyfriend later was that they looked like scratched black plastic. They also gave me that feeling of when you look into a microscope or binoculars and you can kind of see your own eyelashes squished against the lens. It's almost spider-like. His eyes and his everything frightened me like nothing else ever has. He sat there, grinning at me. He knew that I was terrified, and I knew that I had to pretend that I wasn't. I felt totally alone, even though there were tons of people around. No one else seemed to notice anything amiss. I felt as though knowing that this person existed made me hate being alive. This world would never be safe if things like him existed. I sat there, acting totally normal on the outside, trying to keep it together because it seemed instrumental to my survival. I had no idea what this thing would do, but I felt as if my life was in danger. My food was ready for pickup. I got it and then proceeded to go over to a payphone, and I kept my back to him and phoned my boyfriend. I told him to get the fuck over to Spanish Banks because there was a really scary guy here and I didn't know how to get away. After my boyfriend hung up, I stayed in the phone booth, pretending to talk to someone. At some point, I had to get off. Maybe someone wanted the phone. I then sat back on my bench, and he stayed, grinning. A minute or two before my boyfriend got there, he got up and sauntered away, down the beach. When my boyfriend got there, he wanted to go after him. I grabbed his arm hard and told him that we had to get out of there now. I could not explain properly to my boyfriend just how terrifying that experience was. I can still never explain it properly. It was scarier than a murderer. It felt as though if this thing could do something to you, it wouldn't just end your life. It would do something that would destroy or torment your soul forever. Thanks for reading. I know this was long.
I saw a post asking what they are, but not anything fresh talking about encounters. I don't know where else to post these, so I guess this is appropriate a place as anywhere else. I've had 2 encounters with them. The first time was 2 years ago or so, in a gas station parking lot off Highway 58 in Tennessee at like 3 or 4 in the morning. My friend had parked towards the far end of the lot around the side of the building. I was sitting in the passenger side of my friend's car, waiting for him to come out of the store from buying his cigarettes. I was fairly relaxed, enjoying the radio, and then I hear a knock on the window. I looked over and there was a boy. He looked about 12, and he was wearing a gray hoodie with his hood pulled up. I cracked the window and asked him what he wanted, and he responded with, "Can I borrow your phone?" I wasn't going to let some strange kid use my phone, so I told him that I was sure they'd let him use the one inside the store. He kept insisting on it though, and it was the weirdest thing because the longer he stood there, the more unsettled and scared I started to feel. I had rolled up the window by this point, and he became something less than aggressive but more than insistent. That's when I saw his eyes. His hood slipped back because of his movements, and the only way I can describe the feeling of looking into those eyes is primal fear. That's about the time he quickly moved to the nearby tree line, and a few seconds later my friend got into the car. He said I was as pale as a ghost and asked me what was wrong. At the time, I had no idea what the hell that was all about, and had trouble describing it at all to him. He looked at me strangely and said he didn't see the kid at all. That really got to me. So when I got home, I couldn't sleep, and found out exactly what I had encountered. The second encounter happened shortly after at my roommate in my house. This was about 3.5 weeks ago. I'm a night owl, so I'm up at pretty ridiculous times of the night a lot of the time, and I was up at around 3:30ish in the morning and watching YouTube videos. Then I hear a knock on the front door. I would have normally just avoided a knock on the door at that time of night, but my roommate's girlfriend had left only about 20 minutes prior, so I assumed it was her having forgotten something. So I went to the door and cracked it a bit to look outside, and there were these 3 kids. One looked to be around a 16-year-old girl. The other 2 were little boys who appeared to be about 6 and 10 respectively. They wouldn't look directly at me and held their heads at a downward angle. The porch light cast a pretty heavy shadow over their features, so what they were was again obscured. I hadn't forgotten about my previous encounter, but I didn't know any of the neighborhood yet, and couldn't just assume BEK when it could have been a desperate situation standing at my doorstep. I opened the door a bit more, and before I could ask what they were after, the girl said, "Can we come in to use your phone?" I told her I could fetch it and let her use it, but again, she asked to come inside. It was as if I hadn't said anything at all, and her insistence grew just like last time. She stepped from the front walk to the bottom step of my stoop and looked up at me. I saw those eyes again, slammed the door, and went back to the living room, a good distance away from the front door. I heard a few more knocks over the following few minutes, growing more aggressive with each volley until they stopped. I didn't dare get close to the door or windows again until sunrise. I've since installed security cameras around the perimeter of the house, and if they come back, I'll post the footage. So there you have it. Those were the 2 times I've had encounters with BEK. Has anyone else here had any run-ins with these things?
This is not my story, but a story from a friend's great-grandfather. I've gotten permission to tell this story on here. This story takes place during the late summer in the 1960s in Osceola, Iowa, which was a very small farming community. My friend's great-grandpa, Bob, owned a farm out there. He had acres of corn, wheat, potatoes, but corn was his main crop, so he had a huge cornfield. It was around 2 a.m. and his grandfather couldn't sleep, so he went outside to get some fresh air. When outside, he noticed something that looked like a child walking around in the cornfield. So Bob ran back inside and grabbed his double-barrel shotgun and woke the farmhand for backup. They combed through the cornfield in an attempt to find whatever was running around out there. After a while, they still couldn't find anything. So Bob told the farmhand to go back inside the house while he stayed on the porch to watch his cornfield. Then he looks at the gravel road between his yard and the fence line that led to the cornfield, and standing on the road was a little girl around 6 years old or so, and she was wearing a white dress that made her look like she had just gotten out of church. Bob thought that his mind must have been playing tricks on him, so he tried to lay down on the couch to rest, but also still stay somewhat alert. However, not even a minute after he laid down, he heard a knock on the screen door. He walked up to the door and slightly cracked the main door open. He sees the little girl and asked, "May I help you?" The little girl said, "Mister, I'm lost and I don't know where my parents are. Can I come in the house and use your telephone?" Bob felt uneasy and told her that he could get her a glass of water and he could call her parents for her if she gave him the number, but he didn't feel comfortable letting her inside. He felt something off about the girl. However, the little girl insisted to be the one to call and talk to them. And Bob said, "Young lady, it's 2 a.m. and I don't feel comfortable letting a stranger into the house, little girl or not." The little girl started to get agitated and said, "I'm not leaving until you let me in and use your phone." Startled, Bob told the little girl that he was going to call the police to come pick her up, so they can keep her safe and find her parents. He closed the door to go and call the police, and he heard somebody punch the door like a grown man. He walked back and cracked the door open again, but when he looked, he realized that it was the little girl that punched the door. But when he looked at her this time, she didn't have any eyes. Instead, she had pitch black orbs instead of eyes. And she said in a deep voice,
"Let me in."
So Bob grabbed his shotgun and pointed it at the little girl and told her no and to go away. After this, the little girl looks right into the barrel and then back up at Bob, smiled smugly at him and giggled. And then she ran back into the cornfield and disappeared.
I've spent decades in the military intelligence community, so I don't want to put out too much information about myself on a public forum. However, I'm curious if any other experiences overlap my own. We lived off base in this rundown community that looks like any other rundown community you find anywhere else next to a military installation. The apartment complex itself was nice by the standards of the rest of the buildings in our area. At 0:30 on a Friday morning, I was woken up by a series of knocks on my heavy wooden door. I have a rule: one series of knocks is just people messing with the neighbors, but if they really need something, they'll knock twice. Yup, there came the second series of knocks. I expected it to be someone from work trying to get hold of me, and my cell phone had died. It had happened before. I opened the door and stared down at this kid that I estimate to have been about 6 years old. There was so much about the kid that was bizarre. The eyes feature suggested in BEK seems kind of trivial. I can't say with 100% confidence that his eyes were all black orbs. I just don't know because the rest of him was such a mess. When I look at people I don't know, I have a habit of avoiding eye contact. The rest of his description is as follows. Clothing: gray filthy hooded sweatshirt with hood up halfway with matching sweatpants. Shoes: unremarkable. Skin complexion: for lack of a better phrase, I would say that he was extremely pale. Not clear if there were blemishes in way of freckles on his skin, or if he was just really dirty. Hair, possibly reddish-brown, messy, dirty, short. His face was in this grimace of hatred. His expression was like someone who was sucking on the world's most sour candies. Here's the worst part of it. The body odor he was radiating was like something I've never smelled before or since. I've smelled decomposing bodies in war. The closest smell I can relate to was in Ranger School. In RS, due to the lack of food and rest, often guys' bodies will start to consume muscle for energy, combined with a lack of bathing opportunities. This creates an odor that is hard to top. But this kid smelled like weaponized foulness. I asked him, "Can I help you?" In a voice flat, void of inflection, he said,
My parents don't like you.
I responded, what? He stated,
You'll be okay if you give us something great.
I slammed the door on him because I thought he was just screwing with me. He lets out this,
No!
I could hear him on the other side throwing a tantrum, like when you see toddlers in the store when their parents won't let them have something. Definitely a very strange thing to do at midnight. However, kids running around the dilapidated neighborhood unsupervised was a pretty common occurrence. I just chalked it up to bad parenting. I showered and threw my clothes out because I didn't want that stench on me. I went back to bed because I had to be up again in 4 hours. The strange thing is that stench didn't seem to linger. I saw this kid on 3 other occasions. The second time, I was going out to my car in the morning, and he was standing in the parking lot glaring at me. When I came home, he was staring at me standing in the same spot. Then when I looked out the window hours later, he was still in the same spot, glaring with that same sneer at nothing. I asked my wife what she made of him, and she said he wasn't bothering anything, which was a pretty low bar for that neighborhood. Kids would often run around vandalizing people's vehicles and apartments. I thought about calling the authorities. However, what was I going to say? There's this weird kid, he might need help because he's weird and he stinks? The truth is that I hated this kid. Now, I have 3 kids of my own, so I just don't outright hate other kids. However, I hated this one. I hated his smell. I hated that he existed. I felt like he was trying to target and bully me for some reason. No, I didn't want to help this kid. Also, I had these paranoid thoughts of, if this kid hates me so much as I hate him, he's going to lie to the cops and tell them I had harmed him. It could affect my security clearance. It's best just to ignore him and this will all go away. One time I saw him interacting with kids outside, so I know he wasn't a figment of my imagination. However, he didn't play with them like a normal kid. This girl would come up and grab him by the arm, and he would just stand there and glare at her. There were kids running around him, and he just stared at them with that grimace. My wife wanted me to share this experience that I had back in 2011. At the time, I worked in the office of a regional command, J2. I've read into various truly bizarre government programs. However, thinking about it, I still don't know what to make of this kid. I don't know what to get out of writing this. Maybe someone knows more about this kid or has had other experiences similar to it. It's certainly not extraordinary like some of the other experiences people on Reddit have had. I'm not saying this kid was magical or demonic. I can't rule out that he was truly just some kind of misfortunate kid. Maybe the right thing to do would have been to get him help. However, I just can't get past how much I hated him for no reason. Between that and the smell, my experience wasn't that bizarre. What I do know is that I'm fine with never seeing that kid again. Maybe these BEK experiences can be explained by kids just being extra weird?
On Friday night, my mum got home late from work. There was a meeting about her work staying open during quarantine, so she didn't get to our house until around 7:30 or so. After pulling up in front of our house, she noticed a kid walking down the street. Now, my neighborhood doesn't really have younger kids at all, mainly just us teenagers, so my mum found this kid walking kind of strange. She even says to my dad, who is on the phone with her, and he jokes about the kid jumping on her car to scare her. You know, a typical dad trying to be funny. Then, just as fast as he was in front of her and moving to her, he was gone down the road and around the corner. 20 minutes go by before my mum hangs up the phone and steps out of the car. From behind her, she hears a very childlike, "Excuse me." After dropping her purse and screaming, she looks to the kid, who she notices is the same boy who had disappeared around the corner almost half an hour before. Immediately, she told us that she had this overwhelming feeling of pure fear through her entire body. She stares this boy down and notes that she can't see his face at all because of his hood and shadows from the street lamp behind him. And he has no shoes. It's 8 p.m. on a Friday night after a stay-at-home order was just put out, and there was a little boy running around barefoot in just shorts and a hoodie. It was like he was trying to dress like a regular person, but just barely missed the mark. This boy with his head down asks my mum if she had seen another little boy, and that he couldn't find him anywhere, meaning he was one of a pair. My mum, who has 3 kids and is one of the most genuinely kind people I know, had no urge whatsoever to help this child in front of her, or had any kind of sympathy for his situation. She just felt wrong, like there was something off and she needed to leave. In her head, her only thought was that she needed to run up our porch steps and get inside. However, what came out of her mouth was completely different. She tells this little boy, "No, I haven't, honey. Where did you lose him? I can help you look." Every part of her was telling her to leave and that this was wrong, but she offered to help. It's like the children knew she thought something was off though, because right at that second, another boy in the distance screamed. Of course, my mum jumped and her fear spiked, but the boy was eerily calm still. He looked at her and, in a monotone voice, said,
"Oh, there he is."
turned to the opposite direction and ran up our street, then turned left, which was the wrong way of where the voice came. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. Well, last video for the year, and as you can hear, my voice is a little bit strange, so luckily I don't need to record anything for a while. A huge thank you to Monsters in My Mind for joining me with this one. If you haven't already, I did a collaboration over on his channel. It actually came out yesterday. There'll be a link in the description. A huge thank you to all the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. As always, thank you all so much for your continued support. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.